Big Dave Martell here on another episode of Culture Dads. Today, we are the Grim Dads. We're going to talk about something that a lot of folks really like. Something that's a little bit obscure, but it's probably our most requested topic, and that is black metal. So what's up, Mr. Mike?
Yeah, I am jacked about this topic, to be honest. I love talking about music, and this is, I go through periods where I get obsessed with like a band or a genre or whatever, and this is the latest one that I got obsessed with. It's been a while. I've been into it for about 4 or 5 years or something like that. But yeah, man, it's good to take a deep dive into it.
So before we get like into the different bands and like looking at different albums and kind of our journey into it, this is kind of like the main argument when it comes to black metal is what defines black metal, what makes something black metal. You know what I mean? Because you have the guys that are really big second wave Norwegian fans, and to them it's got to be true cult. It's got to be cult, and if it's not that, then they don't consider it black metal. But then I look at black metal a different kind of way. I look at the kind of the elements and the thematic stuff. So there's like a lot of different ways to look at what defines black metal. So Mr. Mike, to you, what is the nature of black metal?
Ooh, that's a big question right off the bat. I guess, it makes sense that we would want to kind of start off with, what is the thing that we're actually talking about. But I guess I would say, this is something that I've made a video about on the Imperium Press YouTube channel. It's part of a video as a response to a guy who kind of did like a hit piece against us. And anyway, I go into like what makes a definition, like how do you define things? And ultimately what it comes down to is you define things ostensively. So I kind of actually lean away from it's got to have this or that element. It's got to have this thing. And if it doesn't, it's not, or it's got to have like this kind of handful of things. Basically what black metal is what people who are called black metal artists do. It's like you point to an example, right? You point to something like Mayhem, and you're like, that's what black metal is. Or you point to, Bathory or Venom or something like that. Mm-hmm. And you go, that's what it is, right? It's examples, ultimately, that sort of, they make a definition of what it is. This is like every definition ultimately cashes out to pointing at examples. So I would just say what black metal is what Bathory is up to, what Burzum is up to, what all of these bands that have been thought of traditionally for decades now as being black metal. That's what they do. I realize that that's a bit hard to go on in some cases, but I think ultimately from a philosophical standpoint, that's how a definition kind of has to ultimately be grounded.
But don't you think that when we look at certain art forms, there are defining elements of art forms? Like you look at, for example, like, Art Deco. It's got certain stylistic elements that define it as Art Deco. So when you look at it, you're like, oh, that's Art Deco. You don't think that black metal can be identified that way?
Well, I think it can, for sure. I guess I'm just making sort of a more fundamental, like philosophical point about how things come to be defined. But if you want to point to aspects of it that make it sort of what it is, I mean, you've got the sort of like tremolo picking, the blast beats, and the lo-fi production. This is kind of what I see as black metal. I guess I'm one of those like true cult guys. The second wave for me is kind of like where it's at, which is not to say that like, the first wave or any of the subsequent ones are no good or whatever. But anyway, you've got the sort of, obviously the visual elements with the corpse paint. You've got the, crazy sort of, activism, shall we say, IRL activism that they're doing and all that kind of stuff. In terms of the sound, yeah, you've got like the lo-fi production, the very cold sound. There's usually an element of like ambience in there, although not necessarily. And above all, you've got the sort of Northwestern European aesthetic, whether sonic or visual. There's all those elements sort of go into making up black metal. And when I listen to it just sonically, what I get the sense of is it sounds very vampiric to me, like just the tonalities that they use. The modes that they go through, a lot of it is very chromatic, but where it's not chromatic, you're working on these sort of Phrygian modes and things like that make it sound very evil and very much like a vampire sort of toccata and fugue style thing or whatever. But it's obviously sort of it's filtered through its own idiom. So I guess in a nutshell, that would be the sort of sonic elements that I would be looking for in real black metal.
Yeah. So what you mentioned there at the end is kind of like how when I first came into like black metal, and I didn't come into black metal with the Norwegian stuff, the second wave. I actually got into that stuff a little bit later, and I never really actually got into it. Like this is gonna be the hot take for the.
This is gonna be an interesting conversation then.
Yeah, that's actually my least favorite wave of black metal, but we'll get into that. We'll get into that.
Yeah,
but when I first came into black metal, I was like, this is very gothic, right? This has a very Poe quality, right? With the album covers that are all dark and gray, and there's lots of castles and weird stuff. And obviously, these are second wave bands, but they're just like the names of the bands give that feeling. Dimmu Borgir, which means like dark castle or something like that. You got Dark Funeral, Dark Throne, right? These things are like all named after gothic things. So it has that very kind of Victorian Poe kind of quality. But as you mentioned, they kind of put it through their own filter to kind of create something that is informed and inspired by that, but it has its own uniqueness as well.
Yeah, oh, definitely. It's and yeah, I mean, like I say, I sort of think of it as quintessentially the kind of stuff that was going on in the late 80s, early 90s. Although this is not to disparage the later stuff into the late 90s and 2000s and all that. But that stuff definitely has like its own flavor. And it's weird because my journey into it was kind of abortive. I tried to get into black metal about 15 years ago or something like that. Like at the time I was an audio engineer. I'll talk a little bit about my audio engineering stuff maybe later. But I had a friend who was also an audio engineer. He was actually a student that I had learned with. Basically, it was like a classmate when I was getting trained up how to do this. And he was like all about Burzum. This was like his like life. He just was an obsessive Burzum fan. And he tried so hard to turn me on to it, right? And I wasn't in a kind of space where that's what I wanted to hear at that point. Mm-hmm. I was into other stuff. I kind of like, was looking at, and we'll probably talk about this in another episode, kind of like into the like 80s underground post-punk scene, the weird sort of experimental shit that was going on at that time. And it was weird and experimental, but it just wasn't what I was after. It didn't have the kind of flavor of the thing that I was into at that moment. So I didn't get into it. I was just like, whatever. And then kind of lost it. And then later on, I kind of came back to it. I don't know what it was, but something kind of pushed it my way. And I started, I got into the first 3 albums that I listened to were Philosophum by Burzum, Dom Satanas, whatever the rest of it is, by Mayhem, and the one by Immortal, the first album by Immortal. I forget what it's called now, actually. And those 3 just really hooked me. I was like, holy shit, this is like, this is insane. Like I just thought that this stuff was like just guys kind of screeching into a microphone and like just like doing like shitty stuff, basically. I thought it was just basically like guys just trying to make your ears hurt. But then I started getting into it and being like, no, these guys can actually play, and they're doing something really interesting and really different. And then I just started to get into it. And then, started to get into actually Burzum's ambient stuff. And that really hooked me. And that kind of became an obsession for me for many years. It's like continues to this day, basically. And it itself spawned a whole genre of dungeon synth. And that is something that I've just been immersed in for like years and years. And it's interesting because about the time I got into black metal, I was starting to like gear up Imperium Press and stuff like that. So the two things actually kind of have a bit of a, black metal reminds me of the old days of like, just editing the first few texts for Imperium Press and whatnot. So it's always going to kind of have that connotation for me. So that was my way into it. I'd be interested to hear how you got into it.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned like Headspace, because before this episode, you said, "Hey, I want to talk about these albums and stuff like that." And I actually put on some of the Burzum albums, and I'll be honest, I just couldn't get through them. I'm not in that zone. I've been, it's like White Boy Summer. I've been listening to like Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons and like Hall and Oates.
Perfect time for this episode to come up.
I just couldn't. And I'll be honest, I listened to some Burzum years ago, and I liked some of it. I didn't go crazy about it like some people did, but I thought it was unique. I enjoyed it at the time. I was a good experience listening through it. But honestly, my first introduction into black metal was, and some people will argue that this isn't black metal, but I argue that it definitely is Merciful Fate. Merciful Fate was the first black metal band that I came into contact with.
Okay.
Mike's probably like squirming in his chair right now, thinking that they're, but King Diamond, Merciful Fate, they invented the look. They had those kind of occult, spooky, graveyard, gothic kind of themes. Although they weren't as extreme with it, it was a little bit more of a performative thing. They went on to influence tons and tons of black metal, right? King Diamond was from Denmark. They started doing it before everybody else did. And
I
then
have a friend who fucking hates King Diamond. It's just, I don't know. I've never been able to figure it out because, like, he does some cool stuff. I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah. Well,
anyway,
tell your friend I'll fight him.
Yeah.
I'd love King Diamond. But anyway, after King Diamond, I started getting into bands like Venom, Celtic Frost. These kinds of, I guess, what we could call proto black metal. And these early bands they don't sound anything like because when you think black metal, you think the bar chords, the strumming of the bar chords, you think the ambience, you think the blast beats. These guys were pretty punky, right? It was almost like punk, right? Literally the first Venom albums are sort of punk rock albums. And that,
yeah, man, for sure.
Yeah, and that's how I got into it, and the themes and everything like that, and then I started getting into bands like Immortal. I still to this day, one of my favorite black metal albums is At the Heart of Winter. I started getting into bands like, now these are second wave bands. Dissection.
That's the one I was thinking of, actually. Yeah.
At the Heart of Winter.
Yeah, I think so. That's Immortal.
Yeah, that's Immortal. That's like their
that's the
first big one. They did have albums before that. What was there? I can't remember. There's something that has to do with opining. Or I can't remember what the name of the album is, but it's a weird album name. But they did have albums before that. Doesn't matter. But then I got into bands like Dissection. The bands from this era, and I really enjoyed it. Satyricon was another one that I got into. And I really enjoyed the way that they did it. I am not a big fan of ambient music. I like punchy, upfront, straightforward.
Okay.
I grew up with Slayer, Iron Maiden, Pantera, these kinds of bands. I'm very American in my tastes of music. Not that I don't like it at all. I can get into some of it, but things that are completely abstract and ambient, it's not something that I'm really, really going to go for. So I got a little bit lost on some of the really abstract second wave stuff. It didn't really tickle my pickle. And then I did get into some of the third wave stuff like Behemoth, Belphegor, Lord Belial. I would consider Goat Whore in that genre, even though they don't have the bar chords and everything. They're very much a reincarnation of the first wave black metal stuff. And Mr. My Guy sent this band to you. I'm not sure if you heard of them before, with Skeleton Witch. I love Skeleton Witch. There's and a lot of people would say that they're not really a black metal band because they have thrashy elements.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Elements.
Yeah.
So they, so that's kind of my journey into black metal, and then I for a short stint I headed a like blackened kind of death metal band when I was living in Jersey. We didn't really go much further than like a 4-song demo, but I did play a little bit of black metal and do that kind of vocals and everything like that. So I like black metal, but I'm very specific in my tastes, and I'm sort of critical of it because especially now, looking back at a lot of the third wave stuff, and a lot of people are going to get pissed when I say this, I think that a lot of the third wave black metal guys, it's like Hollywood. It's not really about it. The second wave guys, regardless of whether or not I'm really into their music, those guys were the real deal. They were really
fucking serious about it. Very serious.
Very serious about it, to the point that they like performed violence and terrorism and shit. Like,
it's like you watch that Metal Headbangers Journey video, and they're doing that. Like, I don't even know who this guy is. Like, I'm not like I know enough about black metal to be able to kind of like talk about it like somewhat intelligently, but I'm not like a huge aficionado, so I don't really know who this guy is. Some guy named Gall.
Yeah.
And they're doing an interview with the guy, and Sam, what's his name? The interviewer is like, so how would you like? What are you trying to say here? I mean, how would you sum up your kind of like worldview? And the guy like pauses for about like 8 seconds, and he just says, "Satan," and that's it, right? Like, that's it. I mean, that's what they're about, right? And you get the vibe that he's not a poser. He's like, that is what the guy is all about, right? That's what these second wave guys are about. And I like the purist stuff. So I think that's what attracts me to them. Also, I do like the ambient stuff from Burzum and whatnot, but it was interesting because you sent a good playlist, like a good few albums over for me to listen to. I didn't get to listen to all of them, but I did get to listen to Venom, Black Metal, their album, which is actually the first time I'd ever listened to it, which is kind of interesting because it's such a landmark album in metal, not just in black metal.
Yeah.
But it did not sound. I was expecting something that was like a kind of, incoherent version of Mayhem or something like that. But what I got was actually unexpected. It was something different. I mean, it was certainly interesting. This was obviously like fresh and new in like 1982. I mean, the Venom album Black Metal comes out a year before the first Slayer or Metallica albums.
Yeah.
But it's clearly a thrash metal album as far as I'm concerned, right? And it's way more thrash than like black metal, really. You can see how the imagery and like some of the lyrical content influence black metal. And in this, like in Venom, you still get these vestiges of older, like, blues rock that moves into classic rock, that moves into early metal. You get the blues rock influences in Venom that are like second wave black metal totally dispenses with. Like, you can kind of see that there's like in the song, I think it's called Teacher's Pet, there's like a total blues rock breakdown, and like one of the tracks is just a straight up like 1-4-5 progression in the verse. So I mean, like, you're not going to see this on a modern day black metal album, and certainly not in a second wave black metal album. But I found it interesting. I think the metal genre is kind of like has been stripping away for a very long time all vestiges of black music, and black music, I mean by this obviously African American music, like from the very beginning of metal, like from Zeppelin and Sabbath onward, like the genre has been bound up with that, like specifically blues. And to be honest, I am not a fan of blues, not really. Anyway, it doesn't mean I can't appreciate it. It has to be done really, really well with a kind of like unique spin on it. Like, I love Zeppelin 1. Zeppelin is just awesome, but without the sort of like instrumental fireworks of that album, I mean, it wouldn't kind of be what it is for me anyway. I mean, blues just doesn't really stand on its own. It has to be like spicy. It has to be something interesting going on. Like, I'll never sit down and get the urge to like chuck on some Robert Johnson or something like that. It's just not my cup of tea. So while I love metal is kind of like hit and miss for me as like in that sense too. I mean, some of the shit just gets my blood absolutely pumping. but I find some of it, like especially the early metal, kind of cringy, to be honest. And often it comes down to like how much of a blues rock element is there in it. And it seems kind of like the history of metal is like a gradual stripping away of that blues rock element. So like obviously like Zeppelin and Sabbath are huge. They're just like so good and so innovative that they can get away with it. And they not just get away with it, they make it good, right? They were doing something radical. And then you get like later 70s metal like Judas Priest and Deep Purple and Scorpions and stuff like that. And these bands are still strong on that sort of blues note, you know what I mean? But they kind of are purging it a little bit, of purging metal of that non-blues element a little bit more. And then you get like, the new wave of British heavy metal, bands like Maiden and Def Leppard, and especially fucking Motorhead, whom I love. And there's even less of a blues rock element in that. There's more sort of an emphasis on speed and aggression, and you get more sort of recognizable metal lyrical elements and stuff. After that, you get like thrash, Venom, and obviously Metallica and Slayer. And the blues element in like Slayer is almost fucking gone, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't think there's a single blues note in Rain and Blood, right? And by the time like death metal, especially black metal, comes around, like there's no blues element at all. And I think this is part of what I really like about black metal. By this time, the genre had kind of purified itself of any of the black elements in it. And there's a kind of parallel move going on here with hardcore punk, actually. I think these two genres are like pure and unalloyed European art forms. But the difference between punk and black metal is that whereas punk kind of maintains some of those like sentiments about anti-racism and anti-sexism and all that, black metal makes the celebration of what is natively European like an ideological element in the music. At least the second wave does. Lyrically, they do for sure. And even in like their actions, like their hatred for anything that's like, of foreign provenance. And even sonically, they celebrate the European element. Like in Burzum, I know you don't like the ambient Burzum shit, but like, if you listen to like everything Varg has ever done musically, like 85% of it is in the Dorian mode, which is like a specific mode that you hear all the time in medieval music. It's just that move from like E minor to D major. And anyway, this is all just to say that black metal tries very hard to purify itself of foreign elements. And I think that's kind of why we like it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think I find a little bit of the black metal stuff. I think some of it gets a little cringy when they go too far. You could be tastefully about it and have the aesthetic and everything like that. I don't think, like, especially now, like the second wave stuff does come off a little cringy to me, at least, because some of those guys were just so try hard. You mentioned Gall that was in that that interview.
Yeah.
That guy is like, he like has gay butt sex to own the Christians. You know what I mean? He wants to be an inversion of Christianity, so he became a it's like, wow, totally wrecked him, bro. You totally got him.
Exactly. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like there's a huge individualistic element in it that's just really smacks of LaVeyan Satanism, which is just like there's no legitimate theological element to that at all. It's just like you say, it's un-Christianity. It's just like the mirror image of Christianity, and so it's governed by Christianity in a really cringy way. Yeah, I can see that. And I actually think this is kind of what kept me away from some of the black metal the first time I tried to get into it, is that I see what you're saying about like the cringy aspect of it. Like, I mean, some of these guys, they're clearly very committed, and some of them are like, they're the real deal, but some of them are not. Some of them are just like LARPing, for a lack of a better term.
Yeah. And that's why I kind of fell off when, like, I guess you could call it third wave. A lot of these guys, it's just like, it's all purely just Hollywood. It's all shock and awe. And at this point, especially in modern times, black metal was originally, we went from literally, like, if you went back, there's interviews in the 90s with the Norwegian guys, and they're saying they're going to cut black throats, and they want to like exterminate people, and they want like, they're just like really, really extreme in their views. And then now you got like black metal bands that are like hashtag Black Lives Matter, black metal is inclusive, all this kind of like fatty shit. And
what the hell?
Yeah, it's It's really
See,
bad.
I'm kind of like insulated from that by just being like a stupid old fogey that like hasn't bothered to look into most of the shit from like the 2000s onward. What the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, how can this be real? How can that be black metal if it doesn't? I don't know.
During the COVID thing, they were like pressuring bands to like wear masks and refusing to go on tour with other bands that didn't have the vaccine, and like all they just like completely cucked like punk rock did. And any of the holdouts, the old school guys that are like, nah, we're still badass edgelords, they got treated poorly. You know what I mean? And it's like the same kind of thing that it happened all over the place. Like everybody remembers the Phil Anselmo debacle where he
where he screamed out white power.
Yeah, he did the Bellamy white power, and he cucked after that. But he did that, and then a bunch of these like hoity douchebags, like what's his name, Michael Flynn from Machine Head, like anybody even thinks that he's good, gets on there. He's like, I can't believe this. This is not welcome in the metal community. He's like, dude, fuck you. You are such a like, oh my god, dude. We used to like beat you people up at shows. Like, this is so cringe. Yeah. I can't get it. Metal is about being based, and it's nationalistic by nature.
Sure.
It's masculine by nature. And there's just the fact that these guys, especially the black metal guys, go in this kind of way. And here's another reason why I sort of like, I kind of got off it. These guys, they continue this like satanic anti-Christian narrative, but it's like low-hanging fruit. They're like beating up on soft targets because they're too scared to go criticize like Muslims and Jews and shit. They won't even, you know what I mean? Like, they won't say anything about Muslims. In fact, some of them are like against Islamophobia and it's like, dude, you guys are just bad. That's all there is to it. You should be ashamed of yourselves.
Yeah, it's just liberalism, which is, just hatred of like whatever was hegemonic immediately before you or whatever. But, they make the music that sounds like, it sounds like, the black metal of yesteryear or whatever. Or it has sonic elements of it, and therefore it's, it's the same thing, whatever. I don't really buy that. I mean, people say, it's all about the music, man. And like, of course, like without good music, you don't have anything, but it's about more than that too. It's not enough for music to just sound good. It has to be the total package. Like, there are a ton of non-sonic elements that go into having a good band. Like, a band has to have the right image. And this is obviously a huge part of black metal. Like, think of the corpse paint, think of the album covers, think of the like stupid monikers and pseudonyms and stuff. It has to look the right way, and it also has to be cool, right? And this is a totally indefinable element. It's about a lot more than just the music, right? It's kind of impossible to break cool down into smaller elements, and it has to have the right attitude, right? Again, like, it's like compare this with punk. You're gonna hear this come back a few times during this discussion. I think black metal and punk have a lot in common. Think of the anti-Christian beliefs and the arson and shit that these guys were doing. Like, all of this plays into the sound, and it's pretty much impossible to divest the band's sound from its aesthetics and its ethos. So you pretty much can't be black metal if you're not, like, I don't know, racist or homophobic or whatever. And if you counter-signal any of these things, you're just a LARPing faggot, like a total poser. And it doesn't really matter what the music sounds like if you don't have these things. Like, okay, so here's an example. Take like Nazi punk rock. And this was actually a huge part of the skinhead and punk subculture in the early 80s. It was a big thing. And it was very troubling to like most of the like classic punk, what are now classic punk bands. And you get these like Reddit tier takes that are like, oh, Dead Kennedys wrote a song called Nazi punks fuck off. Therefore, Nazis can't be punks because the original OG guys said they weren't. And it's all like, well, apply the same fucking logic to black metal then. Like, how does that work? If all the second wave black metal bands were like, fuck all your liberal bullshit, that's what we're about, then how can like what follows on from that reject that sentiment without being something other than black metal? I mean, I understand that like structural conflict basically dictates what these bands are allowed to like and be about. Otherwise, they get canceled. But, how can clearly the audience is just completely brain dead to think that like these two things have anything to do with each other when like one wave is saying like X and the next a next wave is saying like the opposite of X. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say this as well. While I liked this stuff when it came out, like the third wave, the behemoths and these kinds of bands, I liked it when it came out. But now I'm a little bit older and I'm looking back. It's like they didn't, in my opinion, they didn't really get it. You know what I mean? I go and I listen. Recently, I did, to get ready for this show, I did go and I listened to some Immortal albums. Like I listened to like At the Heart of Winter, obviously. I listened to some of Sons of Northern Darkness. I listened to a bunch of the hits from other bands that were out there around that time. And they did have like evil kind of they did have evil themes and narratives in there, but that's not really what it was about. It wasn't like, oh, Satan. That was not really what it was about. It was about telling a story. It was about a cultural expression. And those kinds of things were just like tertiary. They weren't really the main focus. If you listen to the early Immortal albums, it's about telling stories. It's about describing the harsh climates of their ancestors. And it's like meaningful stuff. It's meaningful stuff. The evil aspects of it are just like to make it over the top, is to give it some sensation. These later bands, they don't have any of that. It's all just, I'm Satan, I'm a demon, and it's just like blast beats and bar chords, and it doesn't tell a story. There's no cultural expression. There's no real like actual meaningful flavor to the music. It's all just kind of like overproduced Hollywood tier, just like make believe Satanism. And I just think that it's gay.
Yeah. Oh, for sure, man. It gets old very quickly too when you've got something like that is, you stack it up against something where clearly, in these earlier, like say Immortal albums, it like you said, it's telling a story. It's clearly coming out of something very real.
It has heart.
Exactly. And then once that kind of disappears and it becomes about the trappings of it, it becomes about sort of like repeating what has been done before or whatever, then it kind of loses something, and you get it starts to lose its luster. You know what I mean? And I think, like, for me, actually, one of the things that I actually kind of like about black metal is I like, especially in the second wave, how lo-fi it is and how like purposefully underproduced it is. One of the things you hear a lot from black metal musicians is that they're going for the coldest sound possible. And what this translates to in sonic terms is shrill and trebly, right? It's like the opposite of like what audio engineers want, which is like warm and punchy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of a meme in the audio world. I mean, if you go to like, a studio engineer and you ask him to do this for you, he's going to laugh and be like, yeah, okay, but like, really, what do you want me to do? Right? Like, mm-hmm. And I actually had this experience one time recording in the studio with a punk band. So a little bit of background. Before I was doing Imperium Press, I had a small audio production company, and my friend had his own home studio. And we used to get bands in to do like smaller recordings, usually like guitar overdubs and stuff like that. So anyway, one day we got this punk band in. They were friends of mine, and the vocalist is used to singing and playing on stage. And he like usually just kind of plants himself there, and he just goes hard as fuck for like 20 minutes, and that's their set. And this is just to say he knows how to absolutely rip it up live. But when he gets into a vocal booth, he's like in an alien environment. And he just wanted to do the next best thing when he was recording with me. He just wanted to like grab a handheld mic and like pretend like he's doing it on stage. And this was when I was like kind of wet behind the ears as an audio engineer. And I was all like, no, sorry, we got to use the expensive mic and whatever. Like he wanted to use this SM58, which is like a respectable mic, but it's not top of the line. And I was like, no, fuck that. You got to use the AT4033, which is like this large diaphragm condenser that you got to put on a stand. It's got a windscreen on it and shit like that. I was like, nah, fuck this. Let's use the good mic. We'll get a better sound. Anyway, like long story short, we did the vocals for their EP, which is like, I guess that means for them like 4 or 5 minutes worth of material. And it turned out like shit. It was like asking him to do it while I was like giving him a wet willy or something. It was like totally forced. There's no energy. He was like almost distracted or something like that. And they ended up like re-recording the whole thing with something else. So that was like a bit of a lesson in like listening to the artist, because, audio engineers get like It's like, you decide where to go. I'm the fucking pilot. Don't tell me how to land the plane. But it's not your baby. You're just there to make sure the thing, makes it out with all its fingers and toes intact, right? Like, you're like the midwife here, and that's it. So like when the boys from Dark Throne say, like, we want it to sound shitty, it's like, you fucking make it shitty, right? Like Varg's there telling the engineer for the first Burzum album, no, I don't want that mic. I want a worse mic. What's the worst mic you have? And like, no, we're not going to do levels. Just hang the mic. We'll rough it in. That'll do, or whatever. And like, the audio engineer's job is just to see the artist's vision come to fruition. And for me, I think like the fact of black metal being so lo-fi in that era is actually a huge part of the charm for me. I don't know. I don't know if you agree with that, but I guess it's because I like punk shit. So yeah.
No, I halfway agree, because some of the really, really lo-fi, I guess what they call it, necro black metal or something like. When it's so terrible, it just sounds like scratchy noise and nonsense. I can't get into that. But I do like old school analog recording. I listen to a lot of 80s bands. One of my favorite albums is, they're not like a super skilled band. It's very, very simple, very old school stuff. I love a band called Heavy Load, and they have this album called Roar of the North, and it's like Manowar's dad is what it sounds like Manowar's underground dad. And the recording is not great. It's kind of a little bit fuzzy. It has that it just sounds old school. It was probably recorded on a 4-track tape recorder or something like that. And I love that sound. I love that sound because these old albums, they sort of blend, right? It creates like a wall of sound. It has this big, it sounds thick, right?
Yeah.
Whereas
you get tape compression on it, and it gets a nice sound.
Exactly. So when you hear these modern albums, and a lot of modern guys like this, I like to hear each cymbal hit. I like to hear each this. I like to hear all of the tracks mixed properly. And while there's certainly a lot of skill that goes into producing an album like that, I'm not going to knock on it. But for me, I like to hear the old school albums because it just sounds so good. And you're talking about recording. I had my own experience. I was kind of like this. Speaking of when I played in like a black metal band, it was we were black and death metal because we had death metal elements in there too. But I played guitar, I did rhythm guitar, and I did vocals at the same time. And this is what I was used to doing. And we got a friend of ours, to come in and bring some of his equipment and help us record a demo. Well, he kept trying to make me do them separately. He wanted me to do the vocals and then play the guitar. And for some reason, this threw me off completely. And of
course it did, because that's what you're used to.
Yeah. So it's like, I was like, dude, I can't do this. He's like, why? You just put the guitar down and just do the vocals will sound better when you're focusing on the vocals. And they didn't. They did not sound better. I felt like there's times I was missing. I was like a little bit off time or whatever. And to finally argue with the guy, I was like, I don't even care if you record them one at a time. Let me play my guitar while I do the vocals. And we did, and it sounded so much better because my body, my muscle memory got so used to doing the vocals. Like I would switch to certain chords or go to certain, riffs, and that was my signal for my body to do certain vocals. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's just that was my experience with it, and it sounded so much better.
Oh yeah, definitely. I've got like lots of stories I could tell about this kind of stuff, like with recording. And you basically got to put the artist into their zone where they're comfortable and that they feel like they're on stage, basically. I mean, for most bands, that's what they're used to. They're used to doing it in the rehearsal hall. They're not used to doing it separately on 32 tracks or whatever. So it's just they're out of their element or whatever. But yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's definitely rings true with my personal experience.
Yeah. So going back to black metal, when did you sort of fall off?
Well, I don't know if I really have yet or whatever. I mean, I think because like I say, I get into genres or sometimes just bands where it's like that's all I'm listening to for years sometimes. Um, and this is really the last one that I have got into, the latest one. I think where I'm going right now is I'm starting to listen to, well, not starting, I've been into this for a while, listening to the sort of like the ambient aspects of black metal a lot. Like, of course, I really like the Burzum ambient albums. I really like Dungeon Synth. That's kind of where I'm going right now. But
Black metal to Dungeon Synth pipeline.
Yeah, it's a very well traveled path, I think, especially if you like video game music like I do. But I think the only thing that's kind of like stopping me from like listening to a lot more, especially of the like third wave stuff and on, it's just I don't have the time for it, and I'm just some people can like put music on and work. I can't do that, man. If I put music on and I try to like edit shit, I'll get like a quarter of what I can get done if I just do it without music. So it's actually kind of unfortunate. It's like now the only times I really listen to music are like when I'm driving or something like that, because I'm just working so much all the time. And that's I guess this is kind of like where I'm falling off. It's not really so much anything to do with the genre. It's more about like where I'm at personally.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely the direction that it's leading me in is into looking into, especially like with the dungeon synth, looking into like traditional folk music, like traditional European folk music, because a lot of like I was sort of alluded to earlier, a lot of what Varg does with his ambient stuff is in this Dorian mode that harkens back to a lot of the medieval, troubadours and that kind of thing. Like listening to, and this is not new to me. I mean, I've got a few albums of like Renaissance music and even older than that, and it's a lot of it is very much in the same sort of vein or whatever. But it's kind of leading me towards that, and I think probably where it's going to eventually lead me is into the sort of neo folk scene, which I'm just starting to explore now, little tiny bit. And who knows, if I have some time, maybe I'll put something together of my own in that genre, because that's really where my headspace is at right now. I'm really getting into sort of like the old school, like French, very old school, like French and English troubadours and the just traditional European folk music, basically.
Yeah, that's awesome. I actually have a similar experience. I started coming into bands like let me think. Enslaved. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Enslaved. Falkenbach, Fin Troll. There's like a bunch of bands that are kind of like folk metal or folk black metal, or call themselves Viking metal or whatever. And they have a lot of these like folky elements, and that led me into checking out a lot of neo folk. Really great band that does this is my buddy Dan that runs the Furgan. He does he played in Winterfelleth, right?
Yeah.
Winterfelleth does a tremendous job of adding in these beautiful folk elements, which I'm assuming inspired Dan to start Vulcansman, which is his project now, which Vulcansman is just gorgeous. It's just really beautiful.
Yeah, his music is excellent.
Yeah, it's really, really great stuff. So yeah, I'm a little critical of some of the neo folk though, because I think some neo folk is gay, and I think some of it is like really tremendous. A lot of people like that band High Lung. I think High Lung is LARPy. I like some of the early Wardruna stuff, but I don't really go real crazy into some of their later stuff because I think they I don't know. I didn't really feel it. But yeah, there's this like beautiful blossoming neo folk genre, and there's like all kinds of different stuff that's going into it too. I have a buddy Scott who has a project called Drum Spider. He's a really talented like hand drummer, and he started out doing kind of like hand drum dubstep kind of sort of stuff. But now, because he is a heathen, he is going into like this like neo folk direction. So he's making this kind of like a folktronic kind of music, and it's actually really, really cool. It's a direction that, you know, hasn't been gone before, and it's something that, you know, guys like us could listen to and dance to at weddings and things like this. So there's a lot of really cool, interesting, unique, fresh stuff that's going on in the neo folk scene.
Yeah, it's interesting that black metal, which is filtered into this whole. I mean, this is a big offshoot or spin-off of, if not black metal, it's in the same universe. You know what I mean? Like neo folk and black metal and dungeon synth and sort of like folk ambient music and whatnot. Like this stuff is all kind of in the same universe, and I think it's kind of burgeoning now. Like black metal is kind of mainstreamish now, at least in terms of metal. It certainly has, like, you know, everybody basically knows what black metal is. At the very least, they know what the corpse paint looks like. So it's kind of like it's entered into the mainstream consciousness, but it's also created this sort of like, you know, subculture of all these different subgenres that are really very rich and interesting in and of themselves, and they're very much drawing on like genuine European sources, which I think that the, you know, progenitors of black metal, especially the, you know, the guys in the second wave, would have been very, very happy to know that this is kind of happening or whatever, and they probably are aware of it because they're still around. And, you know, they probably are proud that like that has happened, that they've, you know, these guys from like a small country that, you know, in a scene that was very, very insular and small to begin with, really started this going, and that kind of has grown into this stuff. I think they would be very, very edified by that and very proud of that. So no, that's awesome. I would love to see like the neo folk, especially, kind of take on some more interesting like experimental elements. It's clearly doing that with like your friend Drum Spider, whose music I've heard and is also very good. It would be great to hear that, like, you know, them to like the neo folk artists to really get some very interesting sonic elements, some very experimental and like daring sonic elements going on in there, because it would be an interesting contrast between folk, which is very conventional, and you know, maybe the more cutting edge kind of like experimental electronic music kind of thing. I'd love to see that happen. But it's great that this is all happening. It sort of comes out of this this original black metal scene that started in like the early to mid 80s. It's interesting how these things happen. You can never really tell. You can never really tell what's going to lead into what, right?
Yeah. And, you know, I completely agree. This is what I would say is the, you know, we were kind of going back and forth of what defines black metal. And I would say the defining element of black metal is that it is a raw, unabashed expression of European identity. It is the wolf that has been caged up for so long, breaking out and being in a frenzy. And it is kind of this I don't know how to explain this, but it's like this extreme display of the folk soul that has been repressed for so long, right? And that's what, in my opinion, what black metal was about, and what metal in general was about, but especially what black metal is about. And the fact that black metal has inspired and informed these genres like neo folk and dungeon synth and everything. It's like an exogenesis of music that represented a European people, and that it's completely devoid of outside elements, and it led to something that is very ancestral and very organic, and something that has heart. And I think that's, regardless of whether or not I love all of black metal, or I think all black metal artists are great, or whatever, regardless of my little persnickety ass little critiques of black metal as a whole, it is a European expression. And it led down a logical conclusion of becoming something that is very special and artful and meaningful. And for that reason, black metal is fucking based.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Like it's a very pure such expression of the European folk soul. And I think metal itself is, as I was saying before, it's kind of, purged itself of its original elements and grew into what it, become what you are, it has become more and more of a problem actually for liberalism. Like from the perspective of modern pause, metal is too reactionary, it's too masculine, it's too technical, and frankly, especially with black metal, it's too folkish. Like I remember a couple of my friends having this discussion, and this was back in like 2010, mind you. I mean, like shit has accelerated enormously since then, and they're basically saying just this, like, metal obviously rules, but it's like really problematic, right? Like just look at Phil Anselmo. Like that guy just screams white nationalist 1.0. Like, come on. And just like look at the aesthetic of metal from the 80s up to the present day. What does it look like? It looks like fucking barbarians crushing in some weaselly noodle arm skull with a mace. It's right. It's too reactionary, and it's way too masculine. Like what was that band with the chick singer? Metal band Arch Enemy, I think it was. Yeah. Like that kind of thing is an anomaly in metal. It's very hard for women to do the vocal fry that men can do for metal vocals. So it's too masculine. Another thing that grates against liberal sensibilities is that metal is inherently anti-egalitarian. Like you can't just pick up an instrument yesterday and then go like, scream something into a microphone and you're a metal band. You have to put in the fucking hours. You have to be kind of autistic about it. You got to suffer a bit for your art, right? Yeah. You have to be technically competent. And technical mastery is something that just inherently generates hierarchy. So like those really don't like this kind of thing. And when you look at a metal album cover, I mean, what do you see? Well, what you're likely to see is a hell of a lot of like natively European elements. You're going to see tons of Gothic imagery. You're going to see like everything looks like Halloween. You see barbarians charging on horseback. You'll see winter scenes and like ruined churches. You're going to see the weird sort of barely legible fonts that sort of, I think these things kind of like bear an uncanny resemblance to like Celtic and Germanic knot art. You know what I mean? In another nutshell, you're going to see a whole bunch of heathen imagery. And at a very deep level in his gut, the liberal is repulsed by all these things. I mean, sure, it's kind of like vaguely anti-Christian and like for, a like barista metalhead or whatever, like this is good. But unless his mind has been completely rotted by Marxist anthropology, like he knows in his gut that the skull-crushing barbarian's next move is probably going to be to like enslave him. Like he knows that the heathen is not some egalitarian shitlib like him. In fact, it's probably much worse for him than any pope could ever be, right? So yeah, I mean, metal is really like a weird genre to be kind of wokeified like this. It's kind of funny to watch these people squirm. Like you can see as they're like the metal fans that are like also progressives or whatever. It's like you can see their healthy instincts are kind of like fighting against their paused conditioning or whatever. Yeah. And you're kind of rooting for them, but at the same time, it's kind of like pathetic. I don't know. It's just just funny.
Exactly. It's uncaged masculinity. It's the European folk soul. It's all of these kind of elements that make up metal as a whole. And they're just, I think for this reason that metal is going to be a thorn in the side of liberal pop culture hegemony forever. And they're never going to be able to shake it. It's like, we talk about these like old school authors and these old school artists that had these like just so problematic worldviews, all this kind of shit, but they can't do anything about them because they have foreverness. I think that heavy metal is not, because there's so many like subculture music genres that kind of rise and fall and come up and go down. Metal has foreverness because outside of all of the other genres, it has the most amount of like spiritual expression in it. In my opinion.
Tried to kill the metal, but they failed. You know that song?
No.
Tenacious D? Oh, fuck. No. You got to listen. Go check it out after this. The Tenacious D song, The Metal. You'll like it.
I'll check it out. But so that's kind of what I got to say about it. It's just heavy metal is just, for me personally, it's been huge in I'll tell you what, I was a nationalist before I knew what nationalism was because of heavy metal, because of extreme metal. You know,
I think that's true of a lot of us for a lot of things. You know, like these things. You know, most people don't get argued into the nationalism. They come at it mostly from an aesthetic perspective.
Yeah. So I think there's and yeah, I've read this a lot. I actually went and I looked up. I was like reading some Reddit threads. There, they actually have a problem with, speaking specifically black metal. They believe that it is radicalizing, and that certain albums need to be banned because
they're probably right. To be honest,
they are
really.
Right. I mean, it's like, but as I read that, I'm like, this is like exactly like the church ladies in the 80s all over again.
Yeah. They're just Tipper Gore, but like, you know, the next iteration of that. And like, to be honest, back then I thought that shit was cringe, and I still do. And I would love to see it. I was happy to see it toppled back then, and I'm happy to see it toppled today. You know, like, yeah, I don't know. It's just, it's kind of ridiculous. It's just funny the way that these things structurally come back, right?
I don't even think that those two groups are different, Tipper Gore and the progressives now. I think that the only thing that's changed about them is their veneer. They are both like these policing forces to purge out hostile elements that are problematic for the Globo machine.
Yeah. I mean, like some of what, you know, Tipper Gore was against was certainly not good, like, you know, the pornography and stuff like that. That's degenerate, but they're all for that today, right? So it's a bit of a different situation in some cases, but they certainly structurally, you know, the woke, you know, church ladies of today, basically, they are all about enshrining that into our sociality. So fuck them. And metal is a great vehicle for giving them a middle finger. And so all the power to these guys.
Very cool. All right, Mr. Mike, we're coming up on an hour. You want us to close it out?
Yeah. I think that what, you know, ultimately, I suspect that half of what makes the dissident right what it is just guys who like metal and shit like that, but also hate butt sex. You know, I think it's an aesthetic thing, and we're kind of on this one. We're weird. We're not the normal, you know, right. We are the revolutionary right. We're the vanguard. You know what I mean? It's the rebirth of the ODINIC. I think this is, you know, what we want to see is the great man striding across the horizon with a torch in his hand, ready to burn that shit down. And what the left ultimately fears is not the trad right. The trad right, although certainly venerable and necessary and good, just cannot go up against what we have today. What they fear is a revolutionary right. Only fire can drive out fire. Only a based vanguard can drive out a gay vanguard. And that's what we are. We are the based vanguard. And so that's why we're getting deplatformed. And I think a lot of this comes down to aesthetics. You know, we like stuff that's weird and a little bit frightening and a little bit beyond the pale, but at the same time, we are of the right. You know, we stand for order and whatnot. So this is very, very scary to the left. And black metal is itself a kind of vanguard within European aesthetics for that. So that's kind of my final take on the matter.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. You know, I just wasn't expecting you to say I love this and hate butt sex. This got me off guard. But no, you're right though. It's like you know, and I especially like that last bit that you're talking about, how there's something unique about us that separates us from your standard conservatives or paleo conservatives. And there's a little bit of weirdness about us. There's a little bit of strangeness. There's a little bit of extremeness, revolutionary spirit, creativity. We're a little bit offbeat. We're a little bit out there. But you know what? Offbeat, out there, weird people create things that have uniqueness, and uniqueness gives foreverness, right? So it's like I love all that. I agree with all that. I don't have anything else to say, but let's close it down, guys. Thank you so much. If you're listening now, that means that you're signed up to the Imperium Press Gumroad, and we appreciate each and every one of you guys that support us so generously. Shout out again to Mr. I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly. It is Corsablis. Is that right?
I think that's the one. Yeah, that's what we're going with. Thank you very much, Mr. Corsablis, and thank you to all the patrons who are still listening and who support us. But yes, it's very nice to have guys, signing up and making it possible for us to keep doing what we're doing and to not give a shit. Basically that's what this is. You're allowing us to be able to keep putting out books that we want to put out and not have to be beholden to PayPal and all that. So thank you for this.
Yep. So hails and blessings to everybody. We'll see you guys next time on the next episode of Culture Dads. I'll see you soon.
You're listening to an episode of the latest Culture Dads, Age of Sword and Cassette, where two fathers and community leaders discuss modern culture from a timeless perspective. Head on over to culturedads.com for podcasts every week.